Hey, Basic here. Today we're in the garage because we are putting on some protection on our Walmart bike. And we're going to focus on protecting two specific areas that tend to get beat up the most, which is the down tube here. Usually your front wheel, if it kicks up any rocks or sticks or whatever, they're going to be hitting this tube and giving you lots of little chips. Ideally, we would put this protection on when we first get the bike, when the bike is in its most clean, most pristine condition. But we're doing it a little later, that's okay. I don't really see any bad damage right now. Then we're going to focus on putting some protection on the back of the bike, on the chain stays where that chain tends to slap and put little chips in the paint. So let's get started. First off, we're going to keep our supplies as clean as possible. We need something to clean the frame off. I'm using some glass cleaner and paper towels, as well as a non-shedding towel to help get rid of any fibers the paper towel might have left behind. I'm going to use zip ties, and this is a inner tube from a bike for that rear chainstay. Some scissors to cut both the protection film and the tube. And this is the actual film itself that we're going to be putting on. This is Vivid 3M. It's a plastic clear self-adhesion, adhesive, it sticks on. Film that we're putting on the tube itself. And this is a flush cut clipper thing for cutting our zip ties. This gets the zip tie nice and close. Scissors work just fine. This just gives you a cleaner cut. All right, so first things first, let's make sure our bike is nice and clean. As I said, this is glass cleaner. You can use rubbing alcohol or alcohol wipes. Either works fine. What you really want is something that's going to make sure the surface stays nice and dry. You don't want any moisture or residue on the surface when applying the adhesive protection film. So I just cleaned it off with some Windex. It's not very dirty. I keep my bikes pretty clean. I'm going to wipe off with the this terry cloth here and try and get rid of any fuzz the paper towel might have left behind. I took the front wheel off. You don't have to, but it definitely makes it easier to access everything if that wheel is out of the way. And it's only, for this bike, it's only two, I think they're 15 mil bolts. 15 mil nuts, so it's pretty easy to get to. All right, we're gonna get our film. On this bike, as you can see, there is a bend in the tube. Ideally, I wanna protect from as far back as possible, and I'm gonna go to probably about here-ish. That's kind of the spot that takes the most damage from any kind of rocks get kicked up. But the problem is you can't put the film on this curved spot very easily. It'll leave little ridges where the film has to bend. So I'm going to use one piece for the majority of it, then another piece for this little section right here to try and minimize how much of it has to be folded over itself, and that'll make sense in a second. So the first piece is going to go from about here to, actually, we're going to use a thinner stuff for this part because, again, that bend. Get this tape off. So we're going to use this slightly thinner tape. This part on the very bottom tends to not take any damage, so I'm not worried about covering it as much. So we're going to use this slightly thinner one. This is, I think, the 2-inch version, and I'll put links to both of these in the description below. This piece is going to go from about here to most of the way through the bend in our down tube. So that's about the length that we want. We're going to just cut this with some regular scissors. And what we're also going to do is round off the corners. That will help prevent it from peeling in the future. And I'm not measuring it. I'm not doing anything that precise. I'm just kind of rounding off the corners. If you wanted to, you could make it, really, really precise and trace like a coin or something to make it perfect, but that's fine for me. These things are designed to get beat up and damaged instead of your bike, so these are disposable parts, because you'd much rather replace, a little piece of film than try and somehow fix the paint or any kind of chips in the paint on your frame. So that's nice and clean. I'm going to coil this backwards to help straighten it out. That'll make it easier to apply. That's pretty straight. It's not coiling up on itself. Make sure my hands are nice and clean. All right. These can be difficult to peel. That one came off surprisingly easy. And we're gonna get a good angle so we can make sure it's straight. We're looking straight down on it. And I'm gonna bend it kind of like a taco, like this, with the sticky side, of course, facing towards the bike, and try and get it as centered as possible, which is right about there. And I'm gonna work on the inside first, and then I'm gonna go across the middle, and now I'm gonna work my way such that the corners are the last piece that sticks. And see right here, it's starting to try and, might be hard to tell on the camera, it wants to kind of fold on in on itself, because you see right there, so that's where the tube is bending. It's gonna be tough to prevent that. You might be able to get some of those ridges out with a heat gun, but I'm not too worried about it. As I said, the point of this film is to protect the frame, so it's there to get damaged and then be replaced. So I'm not too worried if it's not absolutely perfect. But apart from these little ridges right there, that's not too bad. I'm okay with that. The top portion, you really can't even tell it's there. You can barely see the edge, but that works. We're gonna use a piece of the wider film for the main section of this tube, where it's gonna take the most rock hits. And on this bike, the logo is actually a sticker. On other bikes, it might be painted on. I don't mind the sticker. If you don't like having a sticker on there, you can peel it off. I'm just gonna leave it. So I'm gonna get the measurement. I wanna go pretty much right to where I stop with this first piece of film. It's about, and we're gonna go about to here-ish. Grab my scissors. Going to cut this right along there. Okay. So yeah, see how coiled up this is? This is gonna be really hard to apply if it's coiling up on you when you're trying to apply it. So I'm gonna try and straighten this out by winding it backwards. And then I'm gonna tighten up the winding. That's probably gonna be a lot straighter. Yep, it's pretty good. Same as before, I'm gonna just round off these corners, which will help prevent it from peeling. If you didn't see my other video, I actually had an issue where I had a pretty bad rock hit and I had to replace a section of this tape. And it was difficult to peel it off at first, but once I got it started, it came off very cleanly. There was no damage to the paint. I was really impressed with how well this stuff worked. So check out that video if you haven't seen it. It was on this bike. There was the piece inside. I put some between the wheel and these seat stays because I was worried that a rock might get stuck in the tire. And then as you're going around, the rock is gonna just take chips out of the inside. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So putting a little piece inside of here, because as you can see on this bike, there's not a lot of space. I'd recommend that. This bike has a fair bit more space. I'm not so worried about it on here. All right, my hands are dirty from touching the tire. Make sure my hands are clean. At least no dust on my hands. Got some smudges, but that's not going anywhere. Okay. So this time, we're not gonna unroll the whole thing or take the backing off the whole piece because we wanna keep it as clean as possible. We're gonna get just the end started. If I can get it started, this is what I mean, it's kind of hard to start sometimes. All right, so just a little bit at first. Try not to touch the back because you'll leave fingerprints on it. All right, so we're gonna get this centered right up to the first piece of tape we put on, right about there. Okay, and again, I'm working from the center outwards. So I'm gonna start unrolling this, and as I unroll it, I'm gonna be gently pushing on the center so it comes down, so it attaches so it's even on both sides. There we go. All right, now I'm gonna go back up and I'm gonna start working my way outwards a little bit. I expect a little bit of folding at the top, because again, this is where that tube bends. But we should be pretty good for the rest of it where it's flat. If you don't like how it's going, that's okay. You can pull it, it'll come off and it'll restick. Try not to lift it off too many times because you don't want to stretch out the material. If you do stretch out this, I think it's some kind of a vinyl, it'll stretch and then it'll be even harder to fit flat. So I'm working my way towards the edges a little bit as I go down. I'm not going all the way to the edges quite yet. I want to get a little bit further down. And I'm not pushing real hard, because I'm not trying to, if I was pushing real hard on this, it might stretch out the vinyl, which is what I don't want to do. And I don't want it to stick really hard quite yet, because if there's a bubble under it, I want to be able to lift it off easily to get that bubble out. I'm just lightly working my way down. Shooting this first-person video is kind of hard. Hopefully you guys can see okay. Working my way down. I'm almost at the end of the tape. Almost at the end, and there we go. That's the end of the tape. Okay, so we're gonna go kind of to the center, like we did up there, and we're gonna work our way around the pipe. And we're working our way outwards and downwards. Outwards and downwards. I got a couple bubbles on that side. That's okay. Remember, the purpose of this is to protect your bike. It's not necessarily a fashion statement. And now I'm pushing pretty hard on it because this is going to be the more or less the final set on it. This part down here, it bends slightly to get to the where your fork is. So I expect there to be some imperfections at the bottom. That's okay. Working my way outwards and downwards. Now I'm gonna go back up to the middle and start working my way outwards and upwards. Yep, couple of ridges, that's fine. If you have a heat gun, you might be able to get this stuff to conform a little better, but the point of this is to protect your beautiful new bike. All right, so that's not too bad looking. From, a couple feet away, you really can't see that it's there. If you get right up on it, see right here where it bends, you get that ridge. That's what I was talking about. You can't do much about that. That's fine. If you get a big bubble, like right here, you can either try and work it outwards, or if you put a little tiny pinprick in it, you can actually use that to get the air out. See now how it's shrinking? There you go. All right. I'm sure there's some folks out there that are better at this than I am. I'm not pretending to be professional. Yep, see there's a couple of ridges right here, and that's because that is where the pipe bends. Same thing right here. This is where the pipe starts to straighten out. So you get a couple of these little ridges. If you want to be a real perfectionist, you can just get a pin and poke each one of these to get the air out as best you can. This one's a little bigger than I like. I'm gonna give it just a little tiny poke. I didn't poke it all the way through. Little poke. There we go. Shrinks that one down. Push that air out. So that's pretty decent protection. This film is surprisingly strong. I hear rocks hitting my down tube on my main bike all the time, and so far nothing's been able to actually pierce this this vinyl wrap. The spots where I'd most recommend putting this wrap is, of course, the biggest one is this down tube. This is going to get nailed by rocks, especially if you're riding on gravel. I put it on my top tube on this bike, and that's simply because I ride this bike a lot more often. If you wear knee pads, you'll start to notice that you get little scuff marks on this top tube here from your knee pads just brushing it lightly over and over and over again. I don't wear pads as often as I probably should, but I did put protection tape on the top tube of my other bike. I'm probably not going to bother for this one, but I am going to make sure that chain stays protected. So we're going to flip the bike over. Okay. And I'm just going to rest it gently on the fork. That'll be fine. Try not to nudge it too much. Now we're going to need our inner tube. We're going to need some zip ties, the scissors, and our zip tie cutter. All right. So you don't have to be quite as clean here because you're not actually sticking anything onto the bike's paint, but I am going to wipe it off. Let me grab my paper towel. Just going to give this a quick wipe. So the reason why we're going to protect this right here is if you're going over lots of bumps, your chain is going to bounce around. And if you ever heard this kind of clacking, clicking sound when you're going over bumps, that's your chain bouncing and smacking on this right here. I definitely do have a couple chips. I'm not sure if you can see those on the camera, but I already have a fair number of chips, and I haven't even had this bike very long. I really should have put this protection on here sooner. I don't know if you can see on this my old bike. This is all just torn up. The paint's completely gone on right here because I never put any protection on, and I just didn't know. This bike's like, oh gosh, 22 years old by now, so I've definitely got money's worth out of that bike. So we're gonna get some piece of tube. I want it to be about the length of the chainstay. And by the way, this one's called the chainstay because this is the one where where the chain is riding along, whereas this top one is called the seat stay because it goes up to where the seat is. So chainstay is the bottom one, seat stay is the top one. So I'm going to get a piece of tube that's about the length of the chainstay. I'm going to cut it. Some people like to wrap this thing with a tube, kind of like that. That's, I think that's overkill. You don't need that much protection. If you have a really nice, carbon bike, sure, go for it. In my experience, this is fine. I got the piece of tube, the length that I need it. I am cutting down the length of the tube. When I cut it, so the tube is gonna have a natural bend to it because of course it's made to go in a circle because it goes around the wheel. I am cutting it on the inside of that circular bend. Okay, there's usually some kind of powder on the inside. I like to just kind of wipe that out. If it's a new tube, that is. These are actually new tubes, they're not used ones. I just got these really cheap ones online. They're only like $5, and honestly, I'd rather pay $5 for a tube and then just destroy it for protection rather than buy a designated chain protection thing for, 4 times the money and it doesn't even work as well. Tubes they're extremely strong. They're great for using as protection. Anyway, side topic. So I am wrapping this around the chainstay, and I'm gonna have the seam on the inside just because I think it looks a little cleaner having that seam on the inside. And I'm gonna take my zip ties. This one could probably use 4. So I'm gonna grab a couple zip ties. I'm gonna put these on here pretty loosely at first to get everything fit the way I want it to. And then I will adjust it once I get the loose set up. Bike's a little wobbly right now because it's just balancing on the front fork. If you have a bike repair stand, this would be a lot easier, but I am not using my homemade one because I just want to do this on the floor because I figure a lot of people don't have a bike repair stand. So it's perfectly doable without any fancy tools. All right, so I'm making sure that when this tube overlaps, I am overlapping the top one over the bottom one. So if there is any water hitting this, it's gonna roll off, as opposed to if the bottom one was on top, it would roll in and get in between the tube and the frame. All right, so I made sure it's rolled pretty tightly all the way around. All right, I like where this placement is. I am going to snug down the first one. Okay, it's not cranked, but it's definitely not gonna move. I'm gonna make sure that the top one is over the bottom one, all the way down. Okay, I'm gonna snug down this end just a little bit so it stays put. All right. Make sure it's stretched out all the way. I don't want to have it, scrunched up like this. I want to make sure it's pulled as long as it'll go. And I'm going to evenly space out these center ones. Make sure it's wrapped tightly and snug them down as well. So that's pretty good. I like the spacement of the zip ties, so I'm going to give them a good hard pull, and that's not going anywhere. So this guy, I like this a lot because when you're cutting a zip tie, and I'll use it on a new one to show you what I mean. If I were to just use scissors and try and cut this straight, it leaves a fair bit up above, which actually can be kind of sharp. Whereas this thing, you see how much is hanging on the top? This gets right down and cuts it very, very flat. So yeah, it's kind of a cool little tool. All right, so I'm just gonna nip these off. If you have wire cutters, that'll work too. Yeah, pretty sure you can't see what I'm actually cutting, but just imagine you can see. All right, and that chainstay is now protected for any kind of chain slap. Oh, dirty. If you wanted to, you could also put one along your seat stay as well. I haven't noticed any chain slap going upwards. This seems to be pretty widely spaced. If your bike, if the seat stays a little bit lower, a little closer to the chain, I would definitely think about putting one up here as well. I did put a seat stay protection on my other bike. I'll show you that. Yeah, here I went pretty overboard. I have a nice thick one, some nice thick tire tube on the bottom here, on the top as well. As you can see, this is a lot closer on this bike than on my other one. So I did opt to put some protection here. Again, I recommend putting some tape on the inside. If the clearance between the tire and the seat stay, if that's pretty narrow, like I can barely get my finger between here. If that's narrow, put some of this tape in there. You'll be glad you did. I had to replace the tape in there after a rock got stuck in my tire. If you wear knee pads especially, put a piece of protection tape up here. I do actually have one. I was a lot more careful and went a lot slower putting the protection tape on this bike. As you can see, there's no bubbles. You can't even see that there's tape on here. If I get real close, you can kind of see the edge of where the tape is. But the rest of it's pretty much perfect. For this bike, I went even more overkill and I put a small section of inner tube tire on the bottom tube as well, secured that with some zip ties. And that's because there was a section that I was riding on that was really gravelly, and I heard a lot of rocks dinging off the front. So I put a little bit extra just on this bottom section that takes most of the brunt, and I'm glad I did. For this bike, I don't know, I might add a little bit of rubber here as well. I don't ride this bike very intensely, so I probably don't need to. But if you're worried about, keeping your bike safe, I'd recommend putting some inner tube at the bottom right there. It's much easier to spend the money right now and just be glad that you did versus finding out you got a big rock chip and then you're sad. Anyway, this video is probably longer than my videos typically are. If you stay till the end, I really, really appreciate it. Everyone that's been watching these videos, I never thought that I would actually get views on YouTube. This is kind of a fun little side hobby of mine. But if you hung out this far, I really appreciate it. This is a lot of fun, and thanks for the support. And have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.